welcome. We're here to unpack the core arguments and, frankly, the often disturbing details found in the source material shaping our world.
And today, we are tackling a big one. Jim Marrs' controversial book, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy.
It's a dense work, and our goal is to really get into the weeds of its central thesis.
The book kicks off immediately with this really potent metaphor: America as a zombie nation.
Pulled straight from old horror films, right? This idea of a populace just stumbling along, unaware they're being controlled.
Exactly. Numbed, controlled by forces they don't see: debt, media manipulation, maybe even drugs, according to Marrs. He argues this isn't fiction, it's the state of millions of Americans.
It definitely sets a dramatic tone. And then there's that George Orwell quote right at the beginning.
Yeah, during times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. That quote really frames the whole book's perspective.
So our mission today is to dive deep only into the arguments presented in Marrs' book. We're exploring his claim that America's massive debt, its shrinking freedoms, the constant crises, that these aren't just bad luck or poor management.
No, the argument is that it's all meticulously planned, orchestrated even, by a hidden financial elite aiming for a global socialist order. That's the claim.
It forces you to ask a fundamental question the book poses. Is the decline we see negligence, or is it, as Marrs suggests, a long-term strategy by global players to essentially bankrupt and take over the U.S.?
And to understand that argument, Marrs insists you have to start with the money. The debt.
Okay, so the $1 trillion conspiracy, that number, a trillion, we hear it all the time now, don't we? It almost feels meaningless.
It does. And Marrs argues that's part of the problem. He really pushes you to try and visualize it, to grasp the sheer, almost unthinkable scale.
How does he do that? What examples does the book use?
Think about laying dollar bills end to end. $1 trillion worth. The book says that line of bills would stretch from here, from Earth, all the way to the sun and back.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of dollar bills.
Or think about area. 1 trillion square miles. You'd need, 3.7 million Texases to cover that area? It's astronomical.
And he emphasizes this because this massive, almost fictional-sounding debt is key to his zombie nation idea.
Exactly. It's presented as the economic chain binding everyone. You can't fight back. If you're buried under debt, you can barely comprehend.
And it wasn't just the size of the debt, but how fast it grew, particularly around the 2008 crisis. What numbers does Marrs point to there?
He pinpoints a really specific window. October 1st, 2008, the national debt hits $10 trillion. Huge number already.
Right.
But by 2009, just a year later, it's almost $12 trillion. That jump, nearly $2 trillion in 1 year, was the single biggest yearly increase in American history.
And this happened while the narrative was all about saving the economy.
Precisely. Saved, supposedly, by the very institutions the book argues profited from the crisis itself.
And beyond the numbers, Marrs details the human cost, the real-world impact of this financial chaos.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't abstract. The book states that by early 2010, something like $5 trillion in household wealth, people's savings, their retirements, home equity, it just vanished.
Gone.
And the predictions cited were grim. 10 million home foreclosures expected through 2012. Think about that. 10 million families losing their home.
Gutting the middle class.
Completely. And employment. The book says 1 in 5 Americans was either unemployed or underemployed. That's a level of distress second only, really, to the Great Depression.
Which brings us back to that core metaphor, the zombie nation. How does he connect the idea of a zombie bank to the entire country?
It's a pretty stark analogy. You know how a zombie bank is one that's technically bankrupt? Its debts are bigger than its assets, but it's kept shuffling along.
Propped up.
The book applies that same logic to the nation. If the U.S. government's total debts exceed its total assets, its productive capacity, then isn't the U.S. itself a zombie nation?
And its citizens.
Become the walking indebted, working just to pay the interest on a national debt they had no direct hand in creating and can likely never pay off. Their future is mortgaged.
The book cites an economist, Rowley, who warns this path leads somewhere specific, somewhere dangerous.
Yeah, Rowley's warning is blunt. If this level of government debt isn't reined in, the U.S. risks falling into third world status.
Like Argentina under Perón.
That's a comparison used. Economic collapse, hyperinflation, scarcity, which then paves the way for more centralized government control, more socialism. The economic crisis isn't the end game, it's the tool to achieve the control that comes after.
So if the decay is the tool, Marrs argues it has to be intentional, which means looking at the origins. what he calls the planned beginning.
Which brings us straight to the creation of the Federal Reserve System.
Okay, now the book argues the Fed isn't really part of the government.
Not in the way people think. It's presented as a government-sanctioned cartel of private banks. The argument is the power to create money should belong to the U.S. Treasury, creating it debt-free.
But
Instead, that power was given to the Fed, and the Fed creates money that the government then has to borrow at interest, which means the nation is perpetually locked into debt to these private banking interests.
And the Fed's origin story, the Jekyll Island meeting in 1910, is presented as ground zero for this conspiracy. The level of secrecy there was extreme.
Absolutely extreme. You had 7 of the richest, most powerful men in the country, reps from Morgan, Rockefeller interests, holding maybe a quarter of the world's wealth at the time, sneaking off to J.P. Morgan's private island.
And they did this completely under the radar.
Totally. They used only first names. Even the staff on the island supposedly didn't know who everyone was or the real purpose. The goal was to draft this banking plan in total secrecy.
A plan that would centralize control in their hands.
That's the argument. And the secrecy didn't stop there. It carried right through into how the legislation was passed. Mars calls it a brilliant deception.
How so? What happened with the initial plan?
The first plan they drafted, the Aldrich Plan, was seen as too much of a Wall Street insider job. It failed politically. So they flipped the script. There was an alternative bill, the Glass Bill. The bankers publicly, loudly pretended to hate the Glass Bill. They attacked it, even though, according to Mars, large parts of it were identical to their original Aldrich Plan. By faking opposition, they made the Glass Bill look like a victory for the little guy, for populism.
And that got it passed.
It garnered enough public and political support, yes. It became the Federal Reserve Act.
And the timing of when it was signed into law is also highlighted as crucial.
Definitely. President Wilson signed it on December 23rd, 1913.
Right before Christmas.
Exactly. Congress had mostly gone home for the holidays. Public attention was elsewhere. It slipped into law with minimal scrutiny.
It really highlights that fundamental split in American economic thinking, personified by Jefferson and Hamilton.
It does. Jefferson was deeply suspicious of central banks. He called them more dangerous than standing armies. He saw national debt as basically stealing from future generations.
Swindling futurity, I think was his phrase.
That's it, just kicking the can down the road, burdening people not yet born.
Whereas Hamilton had the opposite view.
Hamilton, who the book paints as basically working for the international bankers of his day, believed you needed a central bank to have a strong nation. You had to tie the interests of the wealthy directly to the state.
And the creation of the Fed was the ultimate win for that Hamiltonian view.
According to Mars, yes. It permanently fused private financial power with government authority.
Fast forward a century, and the book points to modern examples of the Fed's secrecy and maybe arrogance, especially after the 2008 crisis.
The numbers cited are pretty shocking. The Fed's own inspector general apparently admitted they couldn't account for $9 trillion in off-balance sheet transactions between late 2008 and mid-2009.
$9 trillion. Unaccounted for.
Somewhere. And then you had Fed Chair Ben Bernanke being asked by Congressman Ellen Grayson about where $500 billion in credit swaps to foreign banks went.
And Bernanke's answer?
I don't know. Just flat out, I don't know where $500 billion went.
That doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
Not really. And the Fed actively resists scrutiny. Mars mentions the Gold Antitrust Action Committee trying to get details on gold swaps using the Freedom of Information Act.
And the Fed refused.
They refused, yeah, citing confidential commercial or financial information. It feeds the narrative that the system allows insiders to operate in secret, benefiting themselves while the public picks up the tab when things go wrong.
So if this system is engineered, who are the engineers? The book uses the term New World Order, but defines it pretty specifically.
Right. It's not just a vague bogeyman. It's presented as a small, interconnected group of very wealthy financiers and industrialists. And they operate, according to Mars, through well-known policy groups.
Like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission.
And the Bilderberg Group. These are portrayed as the places where the elite hash out their consensus, and then they place their members into key government jobs to implement those policies.
And Mars makes an even more explosive claim, that this group hasn't just influenced recent events, but has actively manipulated history for over a century, funding opposing sides.
This is probably one of the most controversial parts. The book alleges that powerful financial figures associated with names like Schiff, Morgan, Rockefeller funded the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution, not the anti-communist whites.
Okay.
Then later, it claims these same interests, or interconnected ones, helped finance the rise of the Nazis in Germany. Figures like Prescott Bush, the Dulles brothers, are named in connection with financing Hitler's regime.
That seems completely contradictory, funding communism and fascism. How does Mars explain that?
The explanation offered is cold, hard profit, and control. By funding opposing sides, East versus West, they allegedly ensure perpetual conflict, perpetual arms races, perpetual debt cycles for rebuilding.
So they don't care who wins.
The argument is they don't care about the ideology, only the outcome. Maximum profit and maximum control derive from the chaos they help fuel. Control through engineered conflict.
And this drive for control and wealth concentration is backed up by stats on wealth inequality, pointing towards a plutocracy.
Yeah, the book uses G. William Domhoff's research. In 2007, for example, the top 1% of U.S. households owned about 34% of all privately held wealth.
Wow.
And the top 20%, they controlled 85% of the wealth. That kind of concentration gives that small group immense power to influence politics, fund campaigns, lobby, basically shape the rules in their favor.
And it works the other way, too. Power leading to wealth. The book mentions presidents leaving office much richer than when they entered.
It points to figures like LBJ and Nixon who weren't fabulously wealthy before becoming president but left office as millionaires. The implication is they use their power to set up lucrative deals, land deals, government contracts for allies that paid off later.
The system incentivizes self-enrichment.
That's the claim. And finally, this network's influence is shown through groups like the Trilateral Commission, with members popping up in recent administrations.
Particularly the Obama administration.
Yes. Mars lists several high-profile members: Timothy Geithner at Treasury, Paul Volcker, Larry Summers, General James Jones.
And he gives an example of how this network might function.
The Fiat takeover of Chrysler during the financial crisis is cited. Treasury Secretary Geithner, a Trilateral member, oversaw the deal. The chairman of Fiat at the time, Luca di Montezemolo, also a Trilateral Commission member.
Suggesting these deals might serve a globalist agenda, potentially over national interests.
That's the implication drawn in the book. Decisions made within this elite consensus network.
Okay, so the economic control is one piece. But Mars argues controlling the zombie nation also requires controlling people's physical bodies and minds, which brings us to health, and a really inflammatory claim about engineered diseases.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the darker threads. The book connects alleged ongoing bioweapon research back to World War II, specifically mentioning Nazi scientists brought over under Operation Paperclip.
Scientists linked to IG Farben, the chemical giant.
The claim is that this research continued, focusing on weaponizing pathogens like mycoplasma.
Making them more infectious, more dangerous.
And, crucially, harder to detect. This weaponized mycoplasma is called the perfect weapon in the book.
Why perfect? How does it supposedly work?
The idea is it's been reduced to a crystalline form. Once it gets in your body, it allegedly hides inside your own cells.
Okay.
And from there, it attacks the mitochondria, the power plants of the cell. It drains your energy at a cellular level.
So it doesn't present like a typical infection.
Exactly. It causes widespread fatigue and dysfunction that, the book claims, mimics symptoms of chronic neurodegenerative diseases. It specifically names Alzheimer's, MS, chronic fatigue syndrome.
So doctors wouldn't suspect an infectious agent.
That's the theory. They'd treat it as a chronic condition, not an invasion. And Mars suggests this agent is now incredibly widespread, carried by almost everyone in North America.
Whether diseases are engineered or not, the established pharmaceutical industry, Big Pharma, is heavily criticized for profiting from illness.
Oh, absolutely. Mars portrays Big Pharma less as a health industry and more as a massive marketing machine. Their main goal is selling drugs, often, the book argues, of dubious benefit.
And the profit margins justify this.
The book cites one example, the cholesterol drug Zocor. The calculated markup was over 4,000%.
4,000%.
That's the figure given. With that kind of money at stake, the accusation is they effectively buy influence, corrupting institutions like the FDA and Congress to ensure regulations favor profits over actual public health outcomes.
And the book claims Big Pharma actively suppresses alternative treatments that might threaten those profits, using the story of Royal Rife as a key example.
Rife's story is presented as a tragedy of suppressed innovation. He supposedly developed a technology using electromagnetic frequencies to cure diseases, even cancer.
And what happened to him?
According to Mars, he was systematically destroyed, his lab was targeted, records stolen, and he was bankrupted by endless harassing lawsuits. some allegedly linked back to pharmaceutical interests.
And this suppression isn't just historical.
No, the book points to a 2009 case. A man named James Folsom was prosecuted for distributing Rife-type devices. But crucially, the court reportedly refused to allow any evidence about whether the device actually worked or if it was harmless.
So the focus was purely on regulation, not on the science or patient outcomes.
That's how it's framed, yeah. Protecting the monopoly, not exploring potential cures.
Another long-running health controversy the book dives into is water fluoridation. This is framed as having corporate origins.
Yes, the focus is on sodium fluoride, which Mars describes pointedly as a poisonous pale yellow gaseous element and a component of rat poison.
Strong language.
Very. The conspiracy angle comes from linking the push for widespread fluoridation to Oscar Ewing. He was a former lawyer for Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, and later headed the agency overseeing the Public Health Service.
And the alleged goal wasn't dental health.
Critics cited in the book argue the real goal was darker, to blunt the intelligence of a people, make them more passive, more easily controlled, using a byproduct of aluminum manufacturing to do it.
Moving from health to food, another pillar of control, Mars details a shift in food safety responsibility back in the 90s.
The introduction of the HACCP rules in 1996, that stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point.
And what did that change?
Before HACCP, the government had the primary inspection role. Afterwards, the main responsibility for ensuring food safety shifted to the industry itself. Companies made their own plans.
And the government just checked their paperwork.
Essentially, yeah. Verified compliance. Mars argues this deregulation opened the door for massive contamination events, citing things like huge meat recalls for listeria on a scale never seen before.
The book also raises concerns about artificial growth hormones in cattle, linking them to developmental issues in children.
The issue highlighted is that these artificial hormones are chemically identical to natural ones, so they're impossible to screen for or regulate effectively once they're used.
They just enter the food supply.
Unchecked. And the book points to studies correlating these hormones, these endocrine disruptors, with kids hitting puberty much earlier, girls developing breasts, boys growing pubic hair at very young ages. The theory is these chemicals mimic estrogen.
Then there's the whole issue of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and corporate control over seeds, focusing heavily on Monsanto.
Monsanto gets significant attention, especially for its terminator seeds. These are engineered so the seeds they produce are sterile.
Meaning farmers can't save seeds, they have to buy new ones every year.
Exactly. It creates total dependency. And Monsanto is portrayed as extremely aggressive legally, suing farmers whose fields were accidentally contaminated by wind-blown GMO pollen.
Ruining farmers financially.
The book links this corporate pressure, particularly in India, after WTO rules allowed companies like Monsanto in, to a wave of bankruptcies and even suicides among small farmers starting around 1998.
And this global control over food and health is further locked in by international agreements, like Codex Alimentarius.
Codex sets the international standards for food and health products, but Mars argues it's heavily influenced by pharmaceutical and chemical companies.
How does that create control?
The standards require very expensive clinical trials and analysis to validate any health product, including natural things like vitamins or herbs. Most small producers of natural remedies can't afford that.
So it favors the big corporations.
It effectively limits access to traditional or natural healing and gives corporate science a monopoly. And if a country doesn't comply with Codex, the World Trade Organization can hit them with trade sanctions.
Forcing them into line.
Exactly. It undermines national sovereignty over health choices.
The final piece of this control triad, according to Mars, is the direct drugging of the population, starting with children, often based on what he calls non-existent diseases.
This part leans heavily on critics of psychiatry like Peter Breggin. The argument is that conditions like ADHD or ADD, used to justify medicating millions of kids, aren't proven biological diseases.
How so?
Breggin's analysis, cited in the book, traces how hyperactivity diagnosis shifted over time from brain disease to minimal brain dysfunction to ADD, all without concrete proof of an underlying physical abnormality. The concept of a biochemical imbalance is called a convenient, unproven excuse to prescribe drugs.
And the book questions whether these drugs even work effectively long-term.
It cites studies suggesting they don't, at least not academically. One study from 1999 found that kids on ADHD meds actually performed worse on standardized tests over 4 years compared to their non-medicated peers. Progressively worse. It also mentions a researcher, Dr. Gretchen Lefevre, who was reportedly fired after her research showed no academic improvement in kids taking Ritalin in her area, despite high prescription rates.
Finally, Mars connects modern psychiatry's rise not just to profit, but to a much darker history.
Yeah, this is a really disturbing connection he draws. He links the origins of some modern mental health programs and thinking back to Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union.
How?
He argues that seemingly benign mental health initiatives were sometimes the starting point for much larger programs of state control, incarceration, even genocide. The Nazi Sterilization Act of 1933, which forced sterilization on people deemed defective, is cited as being heavily influenced by leading psychiatrists of the time.
So the concern is that psychiatry, with its power to define illness and pathology, could become a tool for political control.
That's the ultimate fear expressed, silencing dissent by labeling it as mental illness.
All right, so we've covered the alleged economic and biological controls. Now we get to the infrastructure designed to monitor and manage the population, the surveillance state. Mars starts with things like Echelon and Tempest. What are they?
Echelon is described as this massive global NSA satellite network hooked up to supercomputers designed to hoover up vast amounts of international communications, phone calls, emails, faxes, and Tempest. That's the tech that allows spying from a distance by picking up faint electromagnetic signals leaking from computers, phones, etc. Mars notes Echelon was already being used back in the 60s and 70s to spy on Americans opposed to the Vietnam War.
So domestic spying capability from the start.
That's the assertion. And this whole framework got a massive boost after 9/11 with the Patriot Act.
The Patriot Act looms large in the book as a key tool of control. What specific powers does Mars highlight?
Several really intrusive ones. The sneak and peek searches where they can search your property without telling you right away.
Delayed notification.
Right. Then there's Section 215. This gave the FBI sweeping power to get basically any third-party records, medical records, library records, ISP logs through secret court orders.
Any records at all.
That's the claim. And the people or institutions forced to hand over records were hit with gag orders, sometimes lasting a year, so they couldn't even reveal they'd been served.
And the book argues the act was quickly used for things far beyond terrorism.
That's a major point. Critics cited by Mars point out it was used in hundreds of ordinary criminal cases, drug busts, hacking cases, proving, in their view, that its purpose was always broader surveillance and control, not just counterterrorism.
The David Bannock case involving a laser pointer is used as a particularly stark example of potential misuse.
That case is presented as really alarming. Ban was prosecuted under the Patriot Act for aiming a laser at a plane. It was played up as a potential terrorist act.
But there was more to the story.
It later came out, according to the book, that the government itself was secretly testing its own laser warning systems in the very same airspace at the same time.
So the prosecution of Bannock
Served as a convenient cover story, Mars suggests. Making the public worry about terrorists with lasers while distracting from the government's own secret tests, it shows how the act could be weaponized to control the narrative.
Beyond the Patriot Act, there's the long push for a national ID card system.
Yeah, through things like the Driver's License Modernization Act, then the Real ID Act. While states pushed back because of cost and privacy fears, the book notes most driver's licenses now have magnetic stripes holding lots of personal data.
A sort of de facto national ID.
Kind of. 50 linked state databases achieving the same goal. And the book mentions even more direct tracking tech exists, like chips embedded in wristbands or shoes for tracking kids.
And once you have these centralized databases, you get things like the no-fly list, which the book portrays as easily abused.
The list ballooned incredibly fast, 325,000 names by 2006. The potential for error or political abuse is huge. Mars mentioned Senator Ted Kennedy getting stuck on it by mistake.
Needing high-level calls to get off.
Exactly. And even more telling, the example of Arizona State Treasurer Dean Martin. He claimed he ended up on the list right after getting into a political fight with Janet Napolitano, who later became head of DHS.
Suggesting it could be used to target political rivals.
That's the clear implication, a tool for harassment or suppression.
All these agencies and powers were eventually brought under one massive umbrella, the Department of Homeland Security.
DHS, created incredibly fast in 2002, merging over 20 different agencies. Critics cited by Mars saw this consolidation as a huge step towards a national police force.
A potential Gestapo, the book asks.
That's the provocative question posed, yeah? Concentrating that much domestic surveillance and enforcement power under one roof.
And this police state apparatus includes preparations for mass detentions. The book discusses FEMA camps.
It asserts that FEMA, under DHS, has established contingency plans for mass evacuations and housing people in large camps. Specific military bases like Fort Chaffee and Eglin Air Force Base are named as designated emergency holding facilities.
Ready to go.
The book claims contracts have been let for maintaining these emergency relocation camps, and they could be activated, staffed with guards, within 72 hours if needed.
Another piece of this puzzle is blurring the lines between military and domestic policing, chipping away at the Posse Comitatus Act.
Posse Comitatus is the law that generally forbids using the military for civilian law enforcement inside the U.S. Mars argues it's been steadily weakened since the 80s, starting with exceptions for the war on drugs.
Leading to military involvement in incidents like Waco.
Yes, and he details a secret military exercise in Texas that simulated the military taking over from local police in a crisis, suggesting a secret directive, PDD 25, allows this.
Giving the military authority over civilian police in emergencies.
That's the interpretation presented.
The final element of control mentioned is creating a loyal civilian security force, something linked to both Bush and Obama.
President Obama's call for a civilian national security force, just as powerful, just as strong, just as well-funded as the military, raised alarms for critics cited in the book. Comparisons were made to Hitler Youth or Soviet brigades.
And the Bush administration had a similar plan.
Operation TPS, the Terrorism Information and Prevention System. The idea was to recruit millions of ordinary workers, like mail carriers or utility readers, to spy on their neighbors and report suspicious activity.
Creating a snitch culture.
Exactly. TPS was officially dropped after public outcry, but the desire for that kind of pervasive civilian surveillance network is seen as a constant goal of the control system.
And controlling the information people receive. How is that managed without obvious censorship?
Mars argues formal censorship isn't necessary because of media consolidation. He states that the vast majority of U.S. mass media is owned by just 5 giant multinational corporations.
5 companies controlling almost everything we see and hear.
That's the claim. This ensures, he argues, that only the elite consensus view gets amplified. Anyone who steps outside that, who asks truly critical questions, gets marginalized or fired.
Like Phil Donahue.
Donahue is used as the prime example. Lost to show, Mars says, soon after he started questioning the official 9/11 narrative. Critical voices are silenced by corporate control, not direct government censorship.
Which leads to the final control mechanism, shaping minds through the education system itself. Not to create thinkers, but workers.
Exactly. The book points to the historical goals of influential bodies like the Rockefeller-funded General Education Board, or GEB.
What were their stated goals?
According to a letter cited from GEB head Frederick Gates back in 1934, the goal was explicitly not to create philosophers or men of learning. It was to teach people to basically do what their parents did, just imperfectly.
Molding them for wage slavery.
That's the term used, to be compliant workers and consumers, not critical citizens.
And how does modern culture, technology, and screen time play into this?
Mars argues it creates a population that's mentally agile but culturally ignorant. Kids grow up immersed in screens, conditioning their minds against the quiet focus needed for deep reading, linear thought, real critical analysis.
So they can process lots of information quickly, but maybe not think deeply about it.
They become easy targets for manipulation because they lack the historical context and analytical skills to question the narratives they're fed.
And the final twist is direct political indoctrination in schools.
The controversy around President Obama's 2009 speech to school children is highlighted here. Critics were alarmed by reports of some schools teaching songs praising the president.
Seeing it as socialist indoctrination.
Yes. The book also cites a psychiatrist, Dr. Chester Pierce, who reportedly said at a seminar that educators should aim to create international children of the future, implying a deliberate effort to socially engineer kids away from traditional values or national identity.
Okay, so Mars paints this incredibly detailed picture of control, economic, physical, mental. It's pretty bleak. But he doesn't leave it there. He offers solutions, framed as the 3 boxes of freedom. Let's start with the first, the soapbox.
The soapbox represents reclaiming free thought and free speech. Step 1, according to the book, is pushing back against that intense media consolidation. We need independent investigative journalism again, willing to challenge power.
Resisting the corporate narrative.
Exactly. And tied directly to that is the need for fundamental education reform.
Moving away from the worker model.
Completely. The call is for education focused on history, philosophy, critical thinking, the tools people need to actually understand and question the system, not just fit into it as compliant wage slaves.
So freeing the mind is step one. The second box is the ballot box. This seems focused on reclaiming sovereignty financially and politically.
Right, and the absolute number one reform Mars advocates here is tackling the Federal Reserve,
Bringing it into the government.
incorporating it fully into the U.S. Treasury. So the government creates money as money, debt-free, not as interest-bearing debt borrowed from private banks operating under the Fed system. Ending the fractional reserve system is key.
That's presented as the linchpin of the whole economic issue.
It really is. Cut off the debt mechanism at its source.
Also under the ballot box, there's this controversial idea about hidden government wealth, the CFRs. Comprehensive annual financial reports.
Yeah, this research, highlighted by Walter Burian, claims that most governments, state, county, city, keep two sets of books.
Q sets.
One is the public budget everyone sees, which usually shows deficits to justify tax hikes. The other, the CAFR, allegedly shows the real picture, including massive amounts of hidden investment income. Things like pension fund investments, land holdings, profits from utilities, fees, billions, potentially trillions nationwide, Mars suggests, that are kept off the public budget books.
So governments pretend to be broke while sitting on huge surpluses.
That's the explosive claim. Exposing the CFRs is presented as essential to stopping unnecessary taxation.
Okay, financial transparency. What about the voting process itself? Election integrity is a big part of the ballot box solution.
Huge part. Mars strongly advocates returning to paper ballots, counted transparently with citizen poll watchers present. There's deep suspicion about electronic voting systems.
Concerns about privatization and manipulation.
Yes. The book points to the dominance of just a few companies like Diebold, now PES, and ES&S, and highlights known security flaws, like admissions that audit logs could miss the deletion of thousands of votes. The potential for unseen tampering is seen as too high.
The ballot box section also mentions grassroots movements demanding radical political change.
Things like kick them all out or goo, get out of our house. These movements argue that career politicians are fundamentally compromised by corporate money and beholden to the elite.
Their solution.
Drastic action, primarily imposing strict term limits to clear out the entrenched establishment and bring in fresh perspectives, supposedly more loyal to the people than to donors.
And finally, under the ballot box, there's the idea of states pushing back using the 10th Amendment.
State sovereignty. The principle that any powers not explicitly given to the federal government belong to the states or the people. Mars points to examples like states resisting Real ID or legalizing marijuana, despite federal law, as proof that concerted state-level resistance can actually work.
Forcing the federal government to back down on certain issues.
Exactly, reasserting that balance of power.
That brings us to the third, and definitely most controversial, box. The ammo box. This is presented as the ultimate check on tyranny.
It really is. It boils down to the Second Amendment. The argument Mars presents is that the sheer number of firearms in private American hands, estimated at over 300 million, acts as a final deterrent.
A deterrent against what? Foreign invasion?
That, or perhaps more critically in this context, a deterrent against the government itself imposing martial law or becoming overtly tyrannical. The book notes gun and ammo sales spike during crises, suggesting citizens see ownership as protection from the state.
And this section concludes with a very stark quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
From the Gulag Archipelago, yeah. Solzhenitsyn wonders what might have happened in the Soviet Union if citizens had resisted arrests violently, if the secret police feared they might not come back alive from house raids.
Using axes, hammers, whatever they had.
Right. His chilling conclusion, as presented by Mars, is that such resistance, even if futile individually, might have jammed the cursed machine of state terror. It's presented as a historical lesson. Passive compliance enables tyranny. Only the threat of resistance, however unwelcome, can sometimes stop it.
It's a provocative point, presented as a last resort.
Very much a final bulwark when all else fails.
And the book ties this whole struggle back to fundamental constitutional principles, even questioning the eligibility of the commander-in-chief at the time.
The point made isn't just about one person, but about the rule of law itself. If the highest office holder can ignore basic constitutional requirements, the book asks, then what moral authority does the law have over anyone?
Suggesting this breakdown of law could be intentional.
Mars posits that the resulting chaos and division might actually be a goal of the globalists to weaken the U.S. from within through legal confusion and disrespect for foundational principles.
So, wrapping up our deep dive into Jim Mars, the trillion-dollar conspiracy, the overarching takeaway from the book is pretty clear. This New World Order, he describes, isn't really new at all.
No, it's presented as just the same old game of elite control, the old world order, but maybe repackaged with modern technology and more sophisticated methods of manipulation.
Debt, media control, dumbed down education, all working together to keep people, as he puts it, in a zombie state.
Right. From the alleged secret origins of the Federal Reserve's debt machine to claims of engineered illness to the construction of this vast surveillance apparatus, it's all laid out as one interconnected system designed to maintain elite control and keep the population docile and compliant.
And the choice Mars presents is stark. Remain in that daze, or wake up, seek out alternative information, and demand a return to a functioning democratic republic.
The onus is put squarely on the individual to break free from that induced state.
Which leads us to our final question for you, building on the book's framework. Mars outlines this complex machine of control, economic, pharmaceutical, surveillance. If you had to choose just one pillar to dismantle first, to make the biggest impact on regaining individual sovereignty, which would it be?
Would you target the debt system by tackling the Fed, focus on breaking the media monopoly, or prioritize dismantling the surveillance state? Where do you think the most crucial first blow needs to land? Something to think about.